Well, welcome everybody. It is 11:01, so I guess we will go ahead and start. I'm going to do the introductions and welcome here and tell you a little bit about the role of both the Wheat Association and Illinois Soybean Association. We're going to go through a quick thank you to our sponsors for their support for this, and then we'll turn it over to our guest speaker. And after he presents, I'll tell you a little bit about him in a few minutes. After we have our guest presenter, then we'll go on with the Q&A session following the end of his presentation today. So with that, let me first of all just say welcome. I'm glad you are here. Thank you for taking advantage of this educational opportunity that is offered by the Illinois Wheat Association in conjunction with the Illinois Soybean Association. This webinar today is our first webinar in a four-part series of webinars that constitute this year's virtual double crop forum. The next seminars, as part of this four-part series, the next seminar coming up will be at 11 a.m. On this coming Thursday, the 21st. I'm Mike Doherty. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Wheat Association, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I would like to acknowledge some people for helping us and doing the support work on this. First of all, Charlene Blairy, who is the Administrative Assistant for Illinois Wheat Association. And also I want to acknowledge two of the specialists from the Illinois Soybean Association who are providing support during this webinar today. Stephen Sosterik, who is behind the scenes as the IT expert, and Jill Parent, who will be handling the questions as they come into the chat box. I'd also like to acknowledge just the whole communications department and team from Illinois Soybean Growers and Soybean Association for the support they're providing as part of their support for Illinois Wheat Association. Lastly, I want to acknowledge our platinum and gold sponsors. Today, we've got for this whole series of webinars. On the platinum sponsor list, we have both Illinois Farm Bureau and AgriMax Seed Company. Many of you know both of those companies and know AgriMax very well, and they also serve on the board of Illinois Wheat Association. And in our gold sponsorship list, we have FS, the Growmark FS company. We have Seymour Milling, longstanding supporter of Illinois Wheat Association, with their mill down there in Teutopolis, Illinois, and others locations, and then Central Life Sciences. So those are our gold sponsors for today. So thank you so much to our sponsors, industry sponsors, and for helping to sponsor these events. Now I'd like to start or present our today's presenter, turn it over to our to today's presenter to talk about wheat diseases. Dr. Nathan Kleczewski, sorry about that.
Kleczewski, you almost got it.
Kleczewski, is that closer? Kleczewski, hey, there I go, has been the assistant professor and extension specialist in field crops plant pathology at University of Illinois in their crop sciences department. Nathan is in transition. He will be moving over to the Growmark Cooperative in a new role, which I'll allow him to mention as to whatever extent he feels like it. With that, Nathan, welcome. I'm going to click the stop share and let you take over the presentation at this time.
All righty, let me make sure I got the right screen on here. Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. You see my screen all right?
Yes, we do.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Okay, well, I think you know, this will be my third or fourth time speaking with the Illinois Wheat Association. This is always one of my favorite talks to give. I'm a big fan of wheat. It's one of my favorite crops, if not my favorite crop to work on. Really nice to walk through and look at. And I don't have to worry about passing out and you know, falling over like I do when we're doing trials in corn. and so on and so forth. So here's my contact information. Feel free if you ever want to get in touch with me to contact me, either Twitter, email. Those of you who have my phone, obviously, you can use that as well. And I'm always available to talk to anybody if you've got any questions about plant pathology. So every year I speak about wheat, I always talk about our big issue, and that's Fusarium head blight, and it's going to be the same thing this year. I'm going to talk about it a little more this year. Now, we've been lucky since I've been here in the last 3-4 years. We really haven't had major outbreaks of this disease, and that's really great. Some of these, this past year, the previous year, it looked like maybe we were going to enter a weather pattern that was going to result in a lot of issues with head blight, and we've been able to escape that, and by and large in the majority of fields. There aren't new fungicide products that are being released. There's obviously more moderately resistant varieties that are being released, and that's great news in terms of managing this disease. And we've been involved with a lot of different work, but basically our program has been assessing the performance of a lot of these varieties, as well as fungicides and fungicide timings over the past several years. So just a quick overview of Fusarium head blight. Those of you that maybe are new to this particular disease, this is a fungal disease. The fungus that predominantly causes it in Illinois is called Fusarium graminearum. This is the same fungus that actually causes Gibberella ear rot in corn and Gibberella stalk rot in corn. So this particular fungus grows really well on corn residue and small grains residue. It doesn't grow as well in soybean residue, but it still can grow on soybean residue. When the weather starts to get wet and warm, the fungus kind of wakes up from dormancy in the winter. So imagine the spring starts getting warm and wet, and it'll start to produce spores. One type of spore that is produced is actually kind of launched into the atmosphere. And at night, when things calm down, when it's not windy and when it's kind of nice and calm, you actually have little spore showers that will kind of rain onto the wheat heads. And those can move many miles. Then you have another spore type that's produced on the residue, and that is typically going to move via rain splash up into the canopy locally. So you have a local residue-based inoculum court, as well as this more regional inoculum court. And one of the reasons head blight is an issue and a concern for us every year is just think about how many millions of acres, 11.4 or something like that, million acres of corn in Illinois this past year. So that's a pretty large infection court. When it's warm and wet and you have those spores being produced, and then your wheat starts to enter heading and flowering, that's when it's going to be susceptible to this disease. So earlier, when only the foliage is out, that's not when it's an issue. It's when the heads pop out and you start getting anthers produced that you're going to be in a stage where you're most susceptible to this disease. So the spores will land on the head, they will colonize, and depending on the environment and the variety, they can colonize the rachis here and then basically choke off the production or choke off the movement of water as well as nutrients. And that can result in what we call the production of tombstones. So these lightweight, kind of white, even salmon colored or pink colored kernels here. So you get reduced test weight, you get reduced yield. And then the big issue as well is you can get production of vomitoxin. We all are familiar with dockage there. So we want to be keeping our vomitoxin levels down so that we can sell our grain and we're not having to dump it out and toss it. Okay, so this is an example of good grain here, poor grain here. So trying to get more, our wheat looking more like it is on the right. It's a challenging disease to manage because, as you know, wheat doesn't flower uniformly within a field. It also continues to flower over time. So you have your primary tillers that will start to flower, and then depending on the environment and the variety, you can get those secondary tillers flowering within a couple of days, all the way out through maybe 11, 12 days or more, depending on temperatures and everything like that. So because of that, when we do manage or we're looking at fungicides, we have to realize that no matter when we put it on, we're not going to hit all of the plants that are in the most susceptible stage. You're going to be hitting some that are maybe not quite at the right stage, some that are a little past. And because of that, that's why we tend to look at these fungicides or the data we see on fungicide use for suppressing disease is typically around 50% of suppression relative to a non-treated check. In terms of vomitoxin reduction, anywhere between 40–45% reduction, somewhere in there in vomitoxin. That's what we're looking at. So just keep that in mind. It's suppression, it's a tool, and it's part of the answer, but it's not the answer. It's always best to use a combination of moderately resistant varieties and a labeled fungicide applied around that flowering time. So one of the questions that I've been asked many times in my career is, what rate should I be putting on there when I'm making an application? And usually what I tell people is, well, if you look at the data that were generated from years ago, they conducted studies across several regions and many different trials, and they showed, well, when you're applying them at the optimal timing, which is Feeks 10-5-1, when you have about 50% of your main tillers flowering in your field, that there's no difference between low rates and high rates of Carumba and Prosaro when applying at that timing. But since that time, we've also learned that, well, we have a larger application window for applying these products. We know that we can go out anytime from the start of flowering to 5, 6, even a couple days afterwards, later, and still not see a drop off in efficacy. So the question comes up of, well, what about the rate effects when we're coming in different portions of that application window? Do I see a benefit if I'm going on late and I apply a higher rate relative to that low rate? So we started looking at this, actually, I started looking at this a little bit in Delaware. We tried to do it in years past in Illinois. We didn't get enough disease, but this last year we did get some results, and they kind of confirm my results in Delaware, as well as some of the data coming from Ohio State. So what we have is basically we were planting our wheat out there in the fall, and then we're making our fungicide applications. We hand apply these to these plots that are 5 feet by 25 feet, or actually 5 feet by 20 feet. So they're small plots. And we make our applications at flowering, and then we went out 6 days after flowering, trying to hit the ends of that window. And then we also, keep in mind that we're inoculating these with grain spawns. We're trying to get a lot of disease. And we also have your misters on here. So those misters turn on every night for 15 minutes, get those heads nice and wet, try to facilitate disease development. Then they were rated on June 12th for severity, and then we harvested those and we did something called an assessment of Fusarium damaged kernels. So basically you take, say, 100 kernels from a subsample of those plots, and you just count how many of those kernels are tombstones or have that pink discoloration that would be associated with Fusarium damage. These are the different treatments that we're looking at. So in our Prosaro, you can see our 2 rates, low and high, and the 2 timings. So basically we have 4 different treatment combinations for Prosaro and Carumba. And then the newer product, Miravis Ace. Now keep in mind, Miravis Ace has an SDHI or group 7 active ingredient and a triazole, versus Carumba and Prosaro, which are triazole-based fungicide active ingredients. So Miravis Ace is a little different in terms of the modes of action, but it doesn't allow the flexibility that you have with these other products. It's at 13.7 rate that you're going on with. And all I want to show you here is the rate effects on our Fusarium damaged kernels. So again, the percentage of kernels that are tombstones are damaged by Fusarium. So in our controls, we were looking at roughly 25 to about 27% on average. These letters indicate that there's a statistical difference between the different means. So if they share a letter, they're the same. So what I want to point out here is if we look at our Prosaro and we look at the different rates and timings, what do you see? You see there's Ds, right? They all share a D. So all of these here are behaving the same, and we'd say these are all equivalent to one another there's no difference in our rates with Fusarium. You're going to get, roughly the same amount of suppression, no matter what rate you're using. With Carumba, there is this little aberration here, which I haven't been able to figure out what happened with that treatment, why the high one was a little higher here. It could have been an environmental thing or maybe some sort of burn, not sure. But what you see here again, when you look at this, is that in the Carumba, in general, with this exception, you're seeing the similar levels of control. And again, Mirvis ACE in terms of timing, the same control. So these data confirm what I kind of suspected, and they also agree with the other data that I said we have generated in other regions and other people have generated as well. So basically, you can say that don't expect any differences when you're going out in that window and making an application with different rates. It's probably not going to buy you much, if anything, in terms of suppression of head blight. Now, if we look at the yields, it's kind of the same. You look at these again, the control here, we see that the yield, you do see a significant improvement in yields here with these as well. And here's that again, that strange aberration with that one treatment with the Carumba, but not seeing a significant difference with the yields either. They're all sharing letters. That means that basically these populations are all the same. So you can go out there, confidently select any of these products as long as you're going in and applying them in the suggested rates, and you're putting them in at that Feeks 1051 to maybe 6 days after timing. You can expect to see a benefit if you do have conditions that are favoring head blight severity or head blight development. I also did a compilation of all our different trials we've conducted since 2018 or 2017 data. We didn't do any head blight. So you can see here we have 8 different head blight trials that we've conducted since 2018. These are when we did all the different ratings, when they were harvested. These are the different varieties that were used in those different studies. And what I did here, again, all of these are treated the same way. We had infested these with grain spawn with, we basically inoculated them with Fusarium graminearum around flagleaf. In Champaign, we're able to miss those. The other sites that we put these at, we're not able to miss them, but actually they ended up being very good locations for doing head blight work. And then we do our different ratings. So head blight severity, incidence, that's just the number of plants with head blight. That FDK, again, I try to focus on that yield, and then vomitoxin. And I'm not presenting any vomitoxin data because unfortunately, I wouldn't say a sizable number, but several trials don't have vomitoxin data. And so I didn't feel comfortable including that here, but we do have all the different data here for these trials. And we're assessing them statistically. So this is basically what we've been doing over the past several years in one way or another, looking at these different products and looking at these different timings. Now, you might ask, why are we putting this 10-5 timing? So that's a kind of early heading application. That was because we were getting some people interested to know if these products could go on earlier, because there were some marketing materials that were coming out saying that you could go on a little earlier and get just as good control as you would at our optimal timing. So we said, all right, well, let's do that for all of these then and see what we see. So this is what we have for the just the incidence and the FDK. I'm going to actually, I should have just taken the incidence data out because it's easier for us just to look at the FDK here. So here's our control on the right, A. So it had the highest amount of FDK across all those 8 trials. You're looking at roughly 10%. Then if you look at the application timings, at first 10.5, Carumba didn't have an effect. Mirvis ACE, yeah, it did reduce it slightly, maybe 1% or 2. And then Fusarium, there was no change either. So yes, there was a slight reduction at the 10.5 with the Mirvis ACE. However, when you start looking at the other products, again, going into 10.5.1 and 10.5.1 plus 5, those are similar to the Mirvis ACE at 10.5. So they share a BEC. And also the Miravis ACE at 10.5.1, I guess if you just looked at it statistically, you'd say it's similar to the 10.5, but numerically it's a little lower as well. But it's better than if we went out with our Prosero at 10.5 application. And we see with these fungicides as well, as if you go out 5 days after, that's when you see there's really no drop off in terms of our efficacy. And in some case, numerically, it looks like it's even a little better. So basically what we're looking at, and that's just a line to kind of show you kind of where the control is relative to these treatments. You're going to get similar control for the products when you go in with that, again, that window, that 10.5.1 to 5 days after. You might be able to do these 10.5s with Miravis ACE, but one thing I do caution people on, and this is just giving you information I don't have in front of me, but a lot of our coordinated trials that we're doing across regions and wheat types, we always got to keep in mind our vomitoxin. And we get more consistent control of vomitoxin when we're going out in the 10.5.1 and 10.5.1 plus 5 applications for this Miravis ACE. So you can sometimes see a reduction, but maybe sometimes that reduction isn't as good as if you would go out here in this application window. So I would stress, if you are, again, making an application, just stick with our normal recommendations, getting out there at flowering to, 5-6 days afterwards, and go out there at the labeled rate. And that's going to put you in a good position in case head blight conditions do start to hit you. These are the yield data for those trials as well. When we look at the yield data, you can see again, for a lot of these products, there's Prosaro. When you go in later, your yields are going to be, even though they're statistically similar, numerically, they're higher here as well. Same deal with Miravis ACE. Now this might be, there might be a secondary effect here that isn't measured for some of these trials. For example, Blotch could be an issue. That's going to come in later in the season as well. It also could be impacting some foliar diseases that would come in. So when you're looking at these yields, it might not all be attributed to head blight. But it does look like when you're going in at the 10.5.1, 10.5.1 plus 5, when you look within a product, numerically, we're going to be coming out a little bit ahead there. So it's another reason why going in at the 10.5 might not be advisable in all cases. Now, leaf blotch is the other disease outside of stripe rust. Leaf blotch is the disease that's kind of, I'd say is concerning. It causes more consistent yield losses from field to field if you have a lot of residue in your field and growing wheat. A lot of the wheat is pretty susceptible to this stuff. So bloom blotch comes from a residue. It kind of moves up the leaf with rain splash, and it, Staganospora in general, it likes it a little warmer. And so it actually ends up moving up onto that flag leaf and higher, and it has a gloom blotch phase as well. So you get an infection of the blooms. And what that's doing is it's reducing the photosynthetic area on the flag leaf and above. That contributes most of the carbohydrates for grain fill. And then it's reducing the photosynthetic area of those glooms, which contribute as well. And so you end up with similar types of issues where you have reduced test weight, reduced yields. You don't get a production of a toxin, but it's definitely something that can be very detrimental to our yields here in Illinois. And what we were hearing is that some people have been talking about using some alternative products for managing gloom blotch and managing, I should say, leaf blotch in wheat. Fusarium in particular was something that was brought up. And I discussed this with Carl Bradley and asked him about it. And he had said he had looked at it. He didn't see anything in the past that would provide evidence that Fusarium would work. But I thought, well, let's just look now. It's been several years. Let's see if we can generate any kind of data for the producers to see if Fusarium has any impact on some of these newer varieties. And so keep in mind, Fusarium it's a copper-based fungicide. We use it a lot in our vegetable production. It's a contact fungicide, multi-site mode of action. But being a contact fungicide, that means that it's not going to be moving It's not systemic, it's not being taken up by those tissues, and it's not redistributing itself. So when it rains, that stuff is going to eventually wash off, and it's only going to be active where that application takes place. So coverage is essential. It's going to be maybe on the tops of some leaves and not on the bottom, depending on how you're making your application. So that's Kocide. That's what you can expect. So we're just asking the question here, does application of Kocide provide us any benefit for our foliar disease management in wheat? So we set up this one in our Champaign site. And this is an area where we've had wheat in the past. We knew we had some gloom blotch there, so we had inoculum. And same kind of thing where we're going out into those plots and doing hand application. So we were going out kind of that early green up application where some people might do that when you're putting on an herbicide or something like that. We also did a flag leaf application. Maybe that's somebody who's just targeting foliar disease control. And then we also have a combination here with a 10-5-1. So we're not applying Kocide at 10-5-1, but what we have is a program where we have 5 plus 10-5-1 and then 9 plus 10-5-1, so on and so forth. So these are the different treatments that we have. Okay, so we have our Kocide at 5, 9, and then 5 plus Prosaro at 6, 5 at that 10-5-1. Or we have Kocide followed by, and this shouldn't say 4, this should say 5. That's a typo on my part. Kocide at 5 followed by Trivapro at 9. So that would be our, I guess, our 2-pass foliar disease suppression program. Then we have our standard 10-5-1 Prosaro head blight or late application. Tilt at 5, which would be a synthetic analog to Kocide. So this is going to be systemic, right? It's going to be a different mode of action. Tilt followed by Prosaro, which would be kind of that early and late to kind of correspond with that Kocide Prosaro, and then just a straight Trivapro at 9 comparison for foliar disease control. So what we're looking at here is a percentage of leaf blight in this trial, and our control is right here. So we were hovering right around 15%. Now, a lot of, you see an ABC, that means we had a lot of variability in this trial. Some of that is due to the fact that we had some barley yellow dwarf show up, and that was causing some issues with rating. So it ended up being much more variable than we would have liked. Here are our Kocide treatments up in about 25, 26, 27-ish%, whether they're at 5 or 9. Kocide followed by Prosaro, and then you see this large reduction right here relative to Kocide. So you're seeing it's being reduced. That's obviously being driven by that 10-5-1 application of Prosaro. And then the Trivapro, same kind of reduction in terms of the flag leaf diseases. In this case, going on at 9, reduce the foliar disease more than later, which would make sense relative to the weather. It was pretty wet right around flag leaf through heading in that trial. And then you just look at our other standards. Again, our Prosaro 10-5-1, that 5 application doesn't really do much with gloom blotch because it does tend to start developing later in the season after the canopies close and they're holding more moisture. And then we have our Tilt 9 flag leaf, again, good reduction there, 2-pass program, again, right around here, and then our 9, Trivapro 9, giving us numerically the best reduction. But if you look at it, it's the same as our other Trivapro 9 treatment over there. So what we're seeing in this data is in terms of managing leaf blotch, this trial would support some of the data that were coming out of Carl's program many years ago, basically saying that Kocide isn't really going to be giving you much of a benefit for managing leaf blotch. And I actually question here with these applications whether or not some of this issue here could have been some sort of foliar burn or something similar on our treatments. So, keep in mind Kocide, it's going to not be very rain fast. It's not going to be taken up by tissues. It's not going to be moving around in tissues. So although it can have some fungicidal activity, don't expect it to do very much, especially later in the season And those diseases that hit that flag leaf and above, those are the ones that are really going to be impacting your yield. And that's why we tend to say, you know, you're going out at a FEAX 9 all the way through 10.5.1 typically gives us the best efficacy against these diseases. And then these are the yields. Again, if you're just looking at these yields, these actually, there's no significant differences here in this particular trial, but if you, at least at the significance level I was testing, if we lowered it a little, we'd see some separation, but the general patterns are staying the same, where, you know, the ones that reduce disease the most tend to be a little higher on this particular graph versus the ones that had more disease. So that's it for my talk today. I thank you all for putting up with me today, and I'm going to be actually starting a new position, as Mike mentioned, at Growmark. So I'll be the pathology entomology lead over there. That means I'm going to be providing all the extension and research information to all the people in the Growmark community and all the sister companies there. So kind of a similar job, just a different shirt. And I'll be able to talk and still interact with everyone, which is great. And so if you want to make sure that my position gets refilled, I suggest you talk to my department chair and make sure you let him know how important this position is to Illinois and the stakeholders. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much for that presentation. Excellent. I encourage everybody on this call to please send in your questions on the chat box, and we're going to have Jill Parent from Illinois Soybean Association, their communicator, handle the Q&A. But before we do that, just for a minute, I want to take over screen sharing here if I can. I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. Oh, there it is. And acknowledge our sponsors once again. So bear with me while I do that. So acknowledging our platinum sponsors, AgriMax with their high performance wheat seed, and Illinois Farm Bureau. And I beg to explain my background. I'm going to get this changed up for the next webinar, but it's one I had in my deck. I am the senior economist for Illinois Farm Bureau, but Illinois Farm Bureau has a contract with Illinois Wheat Association. So I wear two hats. We're senior economist and policy analyst part of the day, and executive director of Illinois Wheat Association the other part of the day. So also want to acknowledge Seymour Milling as one of our gold sponsors. Buy a lot of buy wheat from our farmer members, very important company and very supportive of Illinois Wheat Association, and Growmark/FS, another important company for throughout Illinois, helping farmers, and Central Life Sciences. So acknowledging those sponsors. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share, and there we go. And then Jill is going to jump in here and see what kind of questions we have. Go ahead, Jill.
We've got our first question submitted. Nathan, are there any new, better fungicides for control of FHB?
So I mentioned Mirvastace would be the newest, but there are going to be a couple more that you will see released probably within the next couple of years. And we've been testing those along with our colleagues, and they look promising as well. So I am encouraged to see that there will be additional tools in the tool belt for our producers. Again, in combination with a moderately resistant variety, that's when we're going to see the best success in terms of reducing head blight. So let's keep driving down the impact of this disease over time.
Nathan, when is the best time to start scouting for Fusarium?
So typically I tell people, and again, it's a little variable. It depends on the weather and the variety, but I tell people to start scouting usually about 18 days after the start of flowering. That's when in general, you'll really start to see things pop out, and you'll have a good idea if you've got a severe issue or not. You can start to see Fusarium a little earlier than that oftentimes, but it takes several days for the disease to really take off and to really see that bleaching. So I say, pay attention after that window between 18 and 26 days after flowering. That's going to be when you need to get out there. If you get out there too late, it's going to be dry and we won't be able to tell if you had head blight or what once everything's dry. So make sure those heads are still green and then you should be good.
Jill, if there's no other ones in the queue,
We've
I would
got
just like.
one more that just came in.
That's right. I've got one in my pocket. So.
Okay. Nathan, did you conduct DON tests in the 10.5 to the 10.5.1 plus 5 timing study? And if you did, what were the results?
So yes, we did conduct those. We are still awaiting the data due to COVID. The turnaround time for the labs has been very slow. I'm hoping that we receive that data soon, but we will have that and it will be part of our large meta-analysis publication that we participate in as part of our United States Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative project.
Nathan, what are some of the costs for each treatment?
That's a good question in terms of the prices of these. I'm not sure what the current price is. I usually tell people to kind of ask their dealer about what deals they have and what sorts of benefits they have, because a lot of these fungicides are going to be performing similarly. So I really kind of leave it up to the grower because it is variable from place to place. And how you're applying it as well. I think most people are going to be flying these on, but there are some people that also will be ground rig applying them as well.
Nathan, since it's related to corn ear rot, are there rotational considerations?
I mean, the biggest thing you can do if you're planting wheat behind corn, that's going to put you at the highest risk level for head blight because you will have the highest production of local residue. And you'll still have all this stuff coming from other fields that you can cause infection. But some people have shown that if you can get your soybean off early and plant in the soybean residue, that you can see a little bit of a benefit. Will it save you from a severe year of head blight? No, but in those kind of low to moderate years, that rotation might buy you enough reduction in vomitoxin that maybe instead of selling it for animal consumption, you're selling it at a premium for human consumption and making a little extra money.
We've got quite a few questions coming into the chat box, which is great. Nathan, is there an effective program to control both Gluck, Blotch, and Scab with one application?
Yes, so our data show that all of these fungicides that we're testing for head blight do pretty well on Blotch as well. And that application timing, that 10-5-1, 5-6 days after is going to be effective for Blotch as well. So yeah, in terms of managing Blotch, it's going to be similar. Now the issue with Blotch, as I mentioned, is that a lot of varieties are going to be fairly susceptible. I don't know of any varieties that are going to be very resistant, or I should say tolerant to Blotch and head blight. That would be, if you could have something that yields well and is really resistant or tolerant to both of those, that would be one to look at.
Which disease is more of a concern? Is there one timing of application that's better than the other?
So yeah, I mean, our data kind of show that even if you go out at, most of the time, if you look at many trials and you look at, say, a Feeks 9 or 10 application versus a flowering application, that you don't really see much of a difference most times in a flag leaf application versus going out at the head. The one thing you won't get if you go out at flag leaf is you won't get control of head blight. So you would have to make 2 applications and then you've just driven up your costs significantly. So in general, that one single application at that flowering time point kind of hits everything. The only thing I tell people, obviously it's important to scout. If you got something blowing up early, well, then you got to make that call early. The other thing is stripe rust. So if it's cool and wet and we're getting detections of stripe rust in the south blowing up, then you need to pay attention to those fields because stripe rust will nip you in the butt real fast and you don't want to delay more than a couple of days with the stripe rust application. It's just going to really pound you if you get that. So scouting is going to be really important.
Hey, Nathan, we've got a question from a farmer who plants wheat after soybeans, but it says, if we have persistent corn stubble because we are no-till, so fungicide on corn can help fungal issues and boost yields. Would fungicides on corn help wheat 2 years later for no-till farmers?
That's an interesting question. I don't really know how to answer that. You know, if you're applying a fungicide to your corn, I guess the idea is maybe you'd be reducing the amount of Fusarium that would be there, but that residue's still stuck in your, field, and you're still going to get infection, colonization by Graminearum. I wouldn't expect to see much of a difference, but that's a good question. I don't have any data. I'm just speculating.
Last question I have on my side is, should the state wheat trials include a treatment study?
Steve, yeah, so that's interesting. So the issue you run into with the wheat trials, if you want an application, you're going to be having to double the size of the trial, and then you also have all these different varieties flowering and maturing at different times, and so it makes it hard to really make an apple-to-apple comparison. You know, one of the nice things about not applying fungicides in the trials is that you're able to get ratings of diseases that's useful for the seed dealers as well as the growers in helping to select varieties. So in general, that's why I like to see the variety trials not sprayed. But you know, if there were a couple, like 1 or 2 standards that were sprayed just for comparison, I mean, you know, that could be useful, but it would be a large undertaking to do an entire trial.
That run out of your questions there, Jill?
Yep, Mike, I'll toss it back to you.
All right, thank you, Jill, and thank you, Nathan, for all those. I just got a couple things to ask of you, Nathan. If people would like the participants on this webinar would like a copy of your slides, are those available? Can you send them out to people on a PDF file?
Yeah, I'll make a PDF file of this talk, and I will email you that, and you can share it with whoever.
Okay, super. I'd like to also just remind everybody that we do have, if you just Google or Yahoo or DuckDuckGo, whatever you use for a search engine, Illinois Wheat Association, the Illinois Wheat Association website, which Charlene keeps very up to date, will almost immediately be at the very top of the screen. And you can click on it and you can get the agenda for these 4 forums. You can also, right there on that web first homepage for Illinois Wheat Association, is my email address and my phone number. So you can contact me if you have any questions, feedback. Feel free to give me your feedback, unfiltered, about these webinars, about ways to improve them. I'm always receptive to constructive criticism and always looking for a way to do my job better as executive director. We do have another question I saw float in. Jill, do you want to ask that? We certainly have the time here, I think.
Absolutely. Does wheat population and or nitrogen rate affect diseases, particularly FHB?
So there's no evidence that it will affect head blight, but it will affect, obviously, canopy closure. And there have been plenty of studies that show that powdery mildew can increase with heavy nitrogen applications or manure applications and increasing population amounts. So you really just have to think about, you know, the more nitrogen you put on it, the quicker those canopies are going to close, and basically that's a nice little tent for moisture in there. And so all those little foliar diseases, your Staganospora, septorias, powdery mildews, can build up in there earlier, and that's when you're going to potentially start seeing issues earlier in the season, and you might have to make a call on a second, you know, fungicide if they start blowing up early. So yeah, to answer your question, some diseases, yes, but not necessarily head blight.
Mike, this is kind of more of a question for you. I've got two that came in on the Q&A. I know you asked about slides from Nathan after this, but how can they access this recording? You know, how do we want to share that? I know that ISA can offer it up on our YouTube channel for sure. But then also, are there any CEU credits offered for upcoming webinars?
The CEU credits I haven't gotten nailed down yet, so I apologize for that. Let me see what I can do. If you've been on this webinar today, I'll be checking with I have to get a response back from their office, which is up in Wisconsin, and get this approved. And we haven't been through this kind of approval process before, where we have where it's done remotely. I have high expectations. You should be able to get CEU credits, but let me check on that. I've been able to do it before, and so we're working on that. And send me an email about that if you have any questions. Let's see, I saw another question come in. Studied, go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, Nathan, if you have time for one more question.
Sure.
Have you studied aerial versus ground application efficacy for head scab?
So that's a great question. That's a really hard study to do because it's just hard to line up everybody. There has been some work that's been conducted out of Canada, and really, not too much of a difference with these systemic products because they, I should say semi-systemic or acropedal, as long as we're getting them where they need to be. And that aerial applicator is getting down low and applying at the right rate, you're going to see similar disease control for head blight. But there's just not enough. It's just too difficult to do those trials. That's why we don't have really good data on it, unfortunately.
Let me get back to the earlier question, Jill, about how they can access this. So you will have a recording of this on the Illinois Soybean Association YouTube channel, right? You were saying?
Correct. We plan on posting that today.
And we're trying to, we're in the process. We just kind of late to the game, maybe on social media. We now have a Twitter account, which is new. If you're on Twitter, please subscribe to our Illinois Wheat Association Twitter feed. And we're working on creating a YouTube channel. So as soon as we get that up, then we'll be posting this on our own YouTube channel as well. But we haven't quite got there yet. We just started that process a few weeks ago. Let's see, I did want to also mention that, and by the way, you can always contact me directly via our website, and either Charlene or myself will get back to you. If we have a link to this webinar, we'll send it to you. So that's not a problem. This Thursday, so in 2 days at 11 o'clock, our next webinar, we will have the top 3 wheat yield winners from Illinois. These are members of the Illinois Wheat Association. One of the 3 winners is in fact the president of the association. This was a very popular session that we had last year at the Double Crop Forum in Mount Vernon. So I really encourage you to join us 11 o'clock this Thursday for the next webinar with the 3 wheat yield winners from Illinois. Well, they're going to talk about how they did it. And then I also want to mention next Tuesday, same time, same place, 11 o'clock next Tuesday, we will have Dr. Guy Allen. He is the senior economist and director of the International Grains Program for Kansas State University. And he's going to be give us his market outlook and also teach us a little bit about how the wheat market really works. So I just want to mention that we have one last webinar, which will be a week from next Thursday. So we have 4 total, 3 more to go. Just like you to be aware of that. Make sure you set aside some time to join us. Appreciate it. With that, Jill, do we have anything else?
Nope, that's all we have.
Those that we got. Thank you all for joining us. This is a really good webinar. Thank you, Nathan. You did a great job. Applaud your expertise, and we wish you the best of luck at your new endeavor with Growmark.
Thank you very much. Glad I could be here.
All right, with that, we'll see you all hopefully online this Thursday at 11 o'clock for the next webinar.